Well, hello, friends. Thanks again for joining us for the Tribe Exchange. We are launching a special series. It's kind of a short run of conversations around the unhurried life. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the practice of Sabbath. It's something that we've been discussing here locally in Austin in our congregation, and we thought it would just be a great conversation to bring to you in the Tribe Exchange. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to have kind of a talking heads and a bit of an interview piece with Christian. He's kicked off our series here, and he'll go into his story, but Christian's been practicing Sabbath for a little bit more than a decade. And he's got a lot of insight and experience with that hopefully will encourage you in your journey and your exploration as well. So with that, welcome, Christian. Good to see you.
Thank you, Elias.
Yes,
it's good to be here.
As always. Do you want to just talk maybe just for a minute about kind of the motivation that even getting this series started? You know, I know it's something that you've practiced, but maybe not something that we brought to the whole community here in Austin in terms of our church. So do you want to just speak a little bit to that of why the unhurried life and why bring this up?
Well, for me, basically, the way it started a little bit over a decade ago is that I love to work. So I'm not a lazy person in a sense. So it's not really my struggle. My struggle is not to work too much. And I'm an entrepreneurial guy, so I usually have several projects going on at the same time. Most of the time, I should probably be dropping at least one or two of those projects if I want to stay sane. But that's sort of my natural bent.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, I just realized that my lifestyle in my natural bent is not helping me in the long run on a variety of levels. So one of them was just presence with my family. So I was in my early 40s or something like that, and it was my kids were amazing and beautiful. I have three beautiful daughters, and I wanted to be around them, and I wanted to be present with them, not just see them, every once in a while after school, before school, that sort of thing. I love my wife. I wanted to have a life that is integrated with her life. Even the work that I was doing, I wanted to do better work, deeper work, more creative work. And what I realized eventually is that there is a ceiling that you can hit by just working hard that actually prevents you from working well.
There's a point of diminishing returns, essentially.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely. So that's sort of what I hit, sort of this wall of, I want to do better, deeper work, more creative, more innovative work.
Yeah.
And I think how I live is preventing me from doing that.
Right.
I want to be with my family, and how I live is preventing me from doing that. I want to be present with my friends that have deep relationships, and my lifestyle is preventing me from doing that.
I mean, it's essentially the adage that your system is set up perfectly to give you the results you're experiencing, right? And so there's an awareness that comes, right? Like you had to kind of recognize I'm having some results, and maybe there's good results in the work area, the vocation stuff, but there's some other results that are not good.
Yes.
Right? How it's impacting your family. Can you speak a little bit more to even what were some of those internal results that you were feeling? Maybe internal tensions that were happening. Like I get the family thing, but what was happening on the inside for you?
I was just not, for example, if you work hard, you will for sure achieve more, right?
Yeah.
So I was working really hard, and I was doing two or three things at the same time, as I always do. But the feeling that you want of fullness was not there, right?
So you can get there. What
was there? It was
the fullness. What was there?
I think it was an overwhelming sense of this is not enough, and lack of fullness. Like there's an appetite for all is good, right?
Right.
And I think what happens is when you have unbalanced, unintegrated life, is that all is good is just beyond the horizon.
Yes. It's kind of like things will slow down after this week, and you tell yourself that every week, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that's something that, I mean, I certainly can relate to. As many of my peers and friends, I think you know, we've all talked about this on some level, that internal, you know, discontent at times while working and having very full lives. It's not a discontent that comes from boredom, right? It's kind of the opposite. It's a discontent that comes from overwork. And there's this kind of this pursuit that you're talking about of, I think, what the Bible would call shalom, right? This peace that's somewhere ahead. If you can just get enough, if you can knock enough things off the to-do list, if you can just get ahead in the work projects or whatever it is,
Yeah.
then shalom. And yet it's kind of becomes this moving target that you're always chasing. Why do you think that is kind of the mode for Western thinkers? And I know it's, you know, everybody works hard, but look, I've experienced enough other cultures and had enough friends who come from other places, other origin cultures, and that's not their mode often of their relationship to work. So why do you think that is? Why is it that we tend to have this kind of repeated pattern of overworking and here in the West?
Well, I think the West is a big sort of it's a big place. So I think there's a variety of cultures, subcultures. But generally speaking, when we keep speak to about the West, we speak about sort of this very like the wealthy countries, the high achievement countries that create essentially a lifestyle of prosperity, which is really, really, really good. Actually, it's
Yeah.
a great byproduct of working hard. But also, we are unbalanced a lot of the time, right? So the American lifestyle specifically, is one of those. I've lived on 4 different countries, 4 different continents. Okay, this
Yeah.
is my fourth continent, sixth country.
Yeah.
This is the American work culture is by far the least healthy work culture I've ever lived in, by far.
Mm.
And I wish I could say that because of the countries that I've lived in and the cultures that I've been in, I look at this with a critical eye of somebody more enlightened, more balanced. But I'm actually not that way at all. I'm way more American,
Yeah.
actually, in my work culture than many Americans, to be quite honest, right? So I'm very, very American when it comes to work culture, in the good ways and in the bad ways as well.
So do you think that there's kind of a promise held out in the American culture for the hard driving workaholic, you know, like self starter? There's this ideal, this promise that's held out for that kind of person.
Partially, yes. Partially,
Maybe like in the meta, right? Like a meta
yeah.
promise. It's not something that's like, it's not, you
Well,
won't
if
find it in
you
the
if
Constitution, but it's there kind of in our psyche.
partially, yes, because if you read, and I really truly believe this is true. I mean, there's a very popular book and sort of concept of the Protestant work ethic,
Hmm.
which is sort of the seed, the cultural seed that was planted in America in a very unique way by Protestants. That sort of created, sort of you perpetuate. It's like a ripple effect of culture where you do things and think certain ways, just because, right? You think it's just the way it is, but actually you're a product of your culture. So there's
Right.
a lot of conditioning in. But what we forget as well is that the Protestant work ethic, the Puritans that came to America early on, who sort of laid the foundation of this country, was actually a much more balanced work ethic because there was Sabbath rest was in it.
Yeah.
So it was work hard and then rest well.
Right.
It was much more balanced, and I think we've lost a lot of that in our culture. So we kept the drive, but we've lost the balance of the rest, the counterbalance of the rest. Now, on top of that, I think a huge cultural influence is a culture of consumerism that was designed,
Yeah.
perpetuated, driven by certain forces way, way later. So this is relatively recent.
Right.
So, like I'm going to read some stats to you, which produced the product of that is that we 90% of us checked our phones first upon waking up, and I'm one of them.
Right.
Okay, and I don't know what it is, but I love checking my phone. Okay.
Yeah.
37% of us take fewer than 7 days of vacation a year. It's shocking, right? Even for me, like, I lived in Europe for a long time. A month is a minimum in the summer. That's just normal, right, for
Yeah.
everybody. It is almost impossible to bring that up as a concept in
That
the United
almost
States of America.
feels like sacrilegious, I think. Like in
Yeah,
my mind,
yeah.
it's like
How dare
you
you?
take a month at a time. Like
A month. Yeah,
what do you
yeah, a
get
month.
done? How are you productive? Like a month off,
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly, right? So 14% of Americans take more than 2 weeks a year. A year.
Oh, 14%. That's it, huh?
Only 14%. 20% of us stay in touch with the office while on vacation, right? I mean, the numbers and the stats, you can look them up. They're very, very easy to find. But we work 137 more hours a year than the Japanese, and that Japanese are widely known for sort of a very intense work ethic. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they even have a word, karoshi, which means death by work. I mean,
Right.
if a culture has a word that says death by work, that culture is a hardworking culture, right?
Yeah, and I've
We
I've
are
seen
more.
like I've seen articles where they'll show a picture of a guy who died on the subway, like just
Yeah,
worked himself to
exactly.
death, and just a younger
Yeah,
guy
yeah.
died of heart failure on the subway on his way home after another long day, kind of a thing.
Exactly. So the Japanese culture has a reputation for that, but where we work on average, statistically,
We're number one, baby.
scientifically, number one, right, in the world, and not in a good way, unfortunately.
Yeah, not in
So
a good way. Yeah. Wow. Well, it's interesting. I think that there is something maybe even to be said about kind of our historical shift in America from like an agricultural country to this, the industrial boom, and we moved into the cities, and something about that became kind of like in the mythology of America, moving into the city and making something of yourself through just hard work, sweat, tears, like networking and grinding it out, just kind of became
yeah.
the guy. Like that's the guy who you want to be, right? Like those are the people that are really in the ring, duking it out for the American dream. And yet in America, right? Like we also know the other stats of skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression and broken families and medications and um, the downsides
So
of this.
there's something fundamentally
Yeah,
off.
right. I think
That
that's the
is that
point.
is that is quite clear,
Yeah.
right? Something we've lost something on our journey
Okay,
that
so let me
that
ask
even
you
made
this.
us who we are in the first place. I think
Right.
as
Yeah.
Americans.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me ask you this: for those who are listening, they're going, "Okay, I think I resonate with a little bit of that. I recognize the water I'm swimming in and the cultural influence even on my life. How do we know? How do people listening to this know they may need to take a Sabbath? Like they may need to begin to adjust some of their work rest balance."
Okay, so I'll give you a few bullet points, but you
Yeah.
can derive other things from it,
Yeah.
right? So let's go from sort of in concentric circles. If you don't have a s- don't have you don't if you don't sleep well, right? You may need a Sabbath. If you've accepted anxiety as a baseline, like this
Mm,
is just how it
that's just how it
is,
is. Yeah.
you know, you might need a Sabbath practice. Um, if you talk about your family, if you're married and the last time you go in on a date with your wife and did something that unifies you, connects you with her, and vice versa with your husband, you've been on a date maybe a month ago or 3 months ago. You haven't gone on a date in months or weeks, right? You may need a Sabbath because your marriage is already suffering. Right? If you have a parallel life with your kids where you don't experience things together on a daily basis, not on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, um, you definitely need to rethink the way you operate. Um, you worry about money, even though you make a good living. You live in America, you're already on the top 1% of the world.
Right.
So even if you're middle class American, you're making more money than most people on the planet, and you wake up in the middle of the night concerned about money,
Mm,
right? There's something off balance there because you're objectively well off,
yeah.
right?
Well, I think
So the list goes on and
like
on.
you just described, you know, all of us. So,
Yes, yeah, 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 yeah.
one of the things you said there, though, I think I'd love to just hear you unpack a little bit was, being present with your family, and you talked a little bit about that personally for you, and I I don't think what you mean is just in proximity, right? Like
Right.
that you were just
Mhm.
physically there. But can you speak a little bit more to what that means, that idea? Because I would hate for people to hear like, "Oh, I'm around my I take my kids to practice, or I'm around them,"
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't think that's what you mean, right? Like, what's the difference there of that present with the people that you love?
It means all of you is present,
Hmm.
not just part of you. Not your body,
Right.
and your smile and your head, but your thoughts, your heart, your emotions, your attention.
So you're not
Your
living in two places at one time.
Correct.
You're
Yeah.
not on your phone and in work mode
Correct.
checking email. You're there. You're there with your
You're
family.
there.
Yeah.
You're there, and it's presence. I tell the story all the time, but after engaging in sort of rebalancing my life through a Sabbath, Deb and I would take the kids every week to a place on the beach, and we would just rest and be there. So one of those trips, we went to Santa Barbara. We lived in California at the time, and we're on the beach, and I remember distinctly the moment where I turned to her and I said, "Honey, I'm here,"
Hmm.
and she goes, and she didn't understand what I meant, obviously, because I meant presence, and I didn't
You're
describe
like,
it.
yeah, I see you.
I'm like, "I'm here. I see you." Yeah. And she goes, "Well, I know that." And I said, "No, no, you don't understand. I am fully here. My heart is here. My attention is here. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not thinking about a to-do list, about the things that I need to achieve, the things that I'm behind on. I am delighting in this moment, in you and the children in this place. I am full of joy right here, right now." And it was such a novel
Yeah.
breakthrough state of being
Yeah.
that I had to tell somebody, although it sort of sounded a little crazy, but I had to tell her there's been a shift, a tectonic shift in the way I am.
And how long into practicing Sabbath would you say it took to get to that space? Like, how long had you
probably
been
about
at,
a
at that point?
probably about a year.
Yeah.
It took a while.
But that's good to hear, like, just from an expectation standpoint, right? That there's an
Oh yeah,
adjustment period, right? Like, this is not just a hard shift and suddenly you're experiencing shalom so easily. But there's almost like
yeah.
a detox that has to happen, right? Like, it takes
Oh, it's
time.
with it was it feels at the very beginning, at least to me, I might be weird, and I think I am. It feels like withdrawal from a drug.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Like, it literally, when I said, "Okay, I think, my dependence on checking my email is definitely doesn't have a place in the Sabbath, in the rest." Um, it's emotionally painful to not check my email. That was sort of the beginning of the journey, or
Right.
emotionally painful to not get something done, sort of because, you rationalize everything. Well, it is really important. This sort of trumps everything else, and I need to get this hour of work done
Right.
sort of in the middle. It's Sabbath-ish,
Right.
you know, s- Sabbath-ish,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
I'm kind of resting. I'm
So
not at
yeah,
work, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's really painful, right? And that's when but the good part of experiencing that is you finally realize that you're an idolatrous person, that you idolize work and productivity, and your worth is somehow, your sense of self-worth is connected to what you do and how you do it and how much you do of it, right?
So there's almost
So
like an identity
it's a
crisis.
slavery.
There's almost an
Yeah,
identity crisis that happens when you stop letting your productivity be the paramount thing of your identity. Right.
exactly. It is freaky and scary and
And everything in
convicting.
you is, it sounds like everything in you is wanting to grab back onto that identity. Like,
Yeah, because that's what you know.
right,
It's easy. You get very predictable outcomes
right,
when your joy, sort of, or sense of self-worth is connected directly to what you do. You have full control.
right,
Well, the problem is that you won't achieve the shalom, you won't achieve the fullness
right.
if you're in charge. So it's really a fake type of value, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. It's kind
it's
of living under
deceiving.
the lie that you are what you produce. And I even think about the Old
Mm.
Testament and, God really trying to reinstitute this rhythm of rest and Sabbath with Israel, who are coming out of 400 years of being basically like, work engines. They're the slaves of Egypt. They are the production machines of Egypt. You know, it's kind of the more
Hmm.
bricks, less straw mentality. Like I am what I produce, and God is going like, no, you're not what you produce. That's not who you are fundamentally. You're made to rest, to be with me, to have peace that only I can bring. Yeah,
And the scary part is that when we look at stories, let's say from the Old Testament, they're so over the top, black and white mythology.
right.
You know, they're sort of archetype stories, right?
Yeah,
These are the stories that are there's archetypes in people, in nations, in state ways of being. But there is no difference between a person who has grown up in a culture where your value is determined by how many bricks you produce, and a culture and a person who is deeply convinced that their value and their worth are determined by their professional achievements, money in the bank, possessions. There is no difference. Fundamentally, there is no difference.
yeah,
That's the thing. So that's why you can bridge that gap through understanding there is no fundamental difference between those two things. Therefore, it is imperative for my success as a human being, for my flourishing, to understand the core ideas behind these things, right?
yeah. And to it sounds like to really intentionally put in some barriers to harness some of those subconscious drivers that want to be, you know, a person who produces, a person whose worth is in production. That you Sabbath kind of becomes this boundary line
Yeah.
that you set up to reorder some of your, not just your rhythm of life, but some of those subconscious drivers, those desires. And I guess that would be my
Mhm.
question next, was like, how, as you've practiced this, how has it helped reorder some of your own desires and your own um, longings in the practice of Sabbath? Like,
Well,
what's
on a few
changed for you?
levels,
Yeah,
I think you crave. I think you crave. You understand and clarify what makes you full and whole,
mm,
and that's a massive, massive shift, because you understand the source of life and joy and prosperity in the fullest sense of the word, right? So you are now reoriented, a for an for shalom as a lifestyle. You are The way you are as a spouse and as a parent changes fundamentally, because you embrace the place of family in your life and your role in the family with so much more depth and clarity, and that produces indescribable, honestly, joy, connection, friendship. My children are wonderfully wonderful and talented and gifted and different. And part of the reason, besides sort of their natural bent of being a certain way, is that we have been this joyful family for over a decade, and our dynamics we have an integrated life together, and that has had a
right.
deep impact on who they became. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, you can't buy that. This is not luck either, right? And I think professionally as well, you do better and deeper work because an unhurried life helps creativity. Creative
yeah,
is actually the most valuable work you can do, is creative work, right? And I don't it doesn't matter if you're an accountant, an engineer, or a security guard. Creative work is still creative work. Within your profession, you can do creative, deeper, more meaningful work. Therefore, you're actually more successful as a professional
sure.
if you have a more balanced, unhurried life.
Like you're
So
experiencing more. I mean, when you say creative work, I think what you're speaking to is those flow states, those flow moments that actually only come when you're doing nothing, right? Like when you're doing something
exactly.
mundane that doesn't
Yeah.
require a lot of engagement. Like you know, you're in the
Yeah.
shower and all of a sudden this brilliant idea comes to you, right? Like
Mhm.
it's having a space where you have a full day of kind of that flow space where there isn't to dos, there isn't You're not backed up next thing to the next thing. You have time for your mind to wander and dream, and
In the
it's a good
same
part to
way,
it. You know, it
in the same
creates.
way that a culture produces a word, um, for death by work, it's fascinating that you understand that culture produces other words, other cultures produce other words. So the Italians, not surprisingly, have a term, dolce far niente. Dolce far niente. And dolce far niente is the sweetness of doing nothing. The sweetness of doing nothing. And if a culture embraces that doing nothing is actually sweet,
Right.
how what kind of different conditioning will you have, right?
Yeah.
And now I think about it now, if like I haven't really explored this, but I can imagine going, there's probably a reason why Italians produce beautiful clothes and
Yeah.
like
A little bit more
and cars
creative.
are,
Yeah.
yeah, and cars are not just functional but artistic, right?
Yeah.
They're beautiful to behold, right?
Yeah.
And so much more stuff that like
And some
the
really
food,
delicious food.
some really delicious food that is also
Yes.
simple. I was in Florence maybe like 3 years right before COVID hit, actually, and Deb and I ordered like a pasta dish in Florence, and it was just a simple pasta dish, and
Yeah.
I seriously had a religious
Yeah.
experience.
Changed your
And I
life. I
go,
get it. Yeah.
yeah, and I go, and I was talking to my wife, and I was going, how is this possible? This is wheat, eggs, probably some cream and some herbs. How,
Right.
I don't understand how they can do this, right? Because anybody can combine those things into a pasta dish, but somehow they
Somehow.
manage to create the perfect pasta, right?
Hmm.
And it has to it has to have something to do with the way they live, the way they view the world, right?
Yes. Well, that makes me think too of this. Robert Mulholland. He's not talking about Sabbath. He's talking a little bit more about silence and solitude, I think. But he gives this idea of he says just wasting time with God, like the
Hmm.
idea of like just go waste some time with God, like go have nothing to do with God, like go
Yeah.
enjoy the presence and the space of just being with God. There's nothing to do, nothing to achieve, nothing to accomplish. Just go waste some time with God. And I don't know, when I hear that phrase, I think of like, for me, I want to go waste time with Rachel. Like I want to go on vacation with Rachel and not having, like, there's a longing to be together. And I think that's the idea behind Sabbath is this. It's a longing to be with God, a space of intimate connection with nothing pressing to do, right?
I think you're right.
And that's
It-
the sweet life. That's the sweet life.
It's the sweet life, and
Yeah. Well, let's make this a little bit more practical, and I want to ask two questions. And the first is, what does like an actual Sabbath look like for you in a day or in a 24-hour period? And then I'd love for you to answer kind of how any advice for people to get started in this practice if they're exploring it.
so for me, it starts on Friday night. So this is sort of there's three ways to do it. I think if you are not sort of bound by the law of it, there's the traditional way, which is the Friday night at sunset to Saturday night. There's the Lord's Sunday, the Lord's Day. It could be Sunday. It could be same thing, only Friday night till Saturday night, or it could be any other day where you go, okay, this I can stick to this on a regular
But does
basis. And
this, if it's another day, does the rhythm of kind of the seventh day, does that play in?
I don't think it's the same thing, in my opinion, but I think it's better than not doing it, right? To me, there is significance in the day, right? But I think it's once you ease into it. I mean, I'll talk about the practicals, but let me tell you about the flow of our day normally. So Friday night at sunset, before sunset, I race to figure out how do I get as much done as
Right.
possible.
It's preparation
You
day.
know, it's the preparation day, so it actually is more stressful in that sense, more intense. But after doing it for over a decade, it actually is not as stressful anymore because you're sort of can plan ahead a little bit better, right? But Friday is usually fairly intense. But the cool thing is that one of the things that I've read over the years is that it's not about it's not even about the time, but it's about the natural rhythms of life. So sunset is a natural rhythm of life. So you cannot negotiate with the sun. Basically, that's the idea, right? And I find that actually intensely meaningful and beautiful. So at sunset, I stop, I cease all production, all work, and we light a candle, Deb and we say a prayer over the candle. Traditionally, actually, the woman, the head of the household, um, does the prayer. So we do it any other all kinds of ways, right? But Deb is supposed to do the prayer, right? And I love that when she does it. So we say a prayer, and the idea is to mark, to almost like cross the boundary into this place of plenty. It's a sanctuary in time, and to allow yourself spiritually, emotionally, mentally to draw that line and to step into it. So the lighting of the candle, the prayer, the welcoming of this sanctuary in time is massive, has massive importance for me now after practicing this for a while. And then basically the day is a day of leisure, right? So we sleep in, we don't diet at all, and I watch what I eat. And on that day, I just eat what I want,
Yeah.
you know? So we feast, right? And we delight in the food because it's
Yeah.
a gift, right? And we give all this significance to the things that we do, deeper joy, deeper enjoyment, deeper gratitude. And we just sleep in, and we make love, and we read books that are unproductive. So, for example, like self-help books or business books, which I love, are not permitted on the Sabbath,
Yeah.
you know. So I would read fiction in something that I forgot. I've been rereading things that I've read when I was, in my teens and my college years, and savoring it from a completely different perspective. So there's zero sort of production value in reading those books because I've read them before, but just the enjoyment of literature, for example,
But
enjoyment of art.
it sounds like you curate that even a little bit to
Yes,
go, hey,
I do.
I'm gonna keep the temptation for production, I'm gonna keep out of this space.
Yes, I do. Yes, for sure. So it's basically anything that elevates your soul, right? So it's delighting in art, in poetry, in music, in film. Um, I go for on long walks. We go together, or sometimes I go alone, and I read. And then we usually, it doesn't happen every Sabbath, but we pick someone we can hang out with and just delight in our friends. It
Yeah.
could be my mom, right, or my sister. I usually go see my mom for a few hours, and we sit around, or bring her to my home, and we just reminisce and talk about nothing and play chess, or do whatever. So it's a very lazy day, very leisurely, and it's remarkable how, if you pay attention to delight as a natural sort of overflow of this, how unusual that feels to delight for
Yeah.
anything, for a full day. Like,
Right.
you have to get used to the level of joy you experience for a full day, because people just sort of feel guilty,
It's almost
when you
like
go
overload of delight, like
overload of delight. Yeah.
too
so
much.
so it's basically a flow of walks and art and creativity and
Yeah.
movies and food and just long conversations about nothing, right? There's no bullet points, no check boxes to check.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, on Saturday night, we light a candle and we say a prayer, and we mark the beginning of the week into which we overflow now, full of inspiration and joy and ideas and energy, right?
Yeah.
Creative energy.
So it's a full 24-hour space
Yes. Yeah.
marketed by, this
Mm.
welcoming the time, and then also, you know letting the time depart and going, hey, like, that was the time, and now we're back, kind of back
Yes.
into the real world, right? um
Yes.
and back to the other 6 days of the week, essentially. Got it.
Yes.
Okay, well, before we wrap up, any advice to someone who's starting to explore this idea of a Sabbath rhythm or a practice?
Yes. My advice is, I guess, ask yourself, when you look at your life, ask yourself if your life is not perfectly designed for the outcomes you're experiencing.
Right.
And if you're unhappy, if you're unsatisfied, commit. commit. So starting is the key thing here. You have to start. And then after you start, be ready for it to be very hard and not very enjoyable and not very restful and not very delightful.
That's a great
You know,
pitch.
yeah. So it just is, right? So I call it the J curve. I think it's, where you start over here and then you actually, things get worse before they get better. But then after you sort of cross over to the when you started time, it actually becomes exponentially better
Kind of
over
that
time.
detox, right? That you got to work
Yeah.
through some of that stuff. Yeah.
You have to go through withdrawal. You have to go through sort of the idolatrous you, the
Yeah.
elements that need to be sort of released. You need to let go. You need to adjust sort of your culture, your spouse, you know. So my advice is make sure if you're doing this together with your spouse, talk about it extensively,
Yeah.
because we would have fights on Sabbaths all the time because I thought what she planned and what she wanted to do messed with my Sabbath. And she would go, "Excuse me, I thought it was our Sabbath, right?" And so it's a very selfish Sabbath all of a sudden,
Yeah.
So I'll go, "Well, that's not very Sabbathy of me."
Right.
And so that, I think, and then take it easy. Just embrace the suck, right? In the sense of, look, it's just not natural to you. You're not conditioned for this. You don't have a lifestyle of this. Anything new, it takes a while for it to become a habit,
Yeah.
and it takes after that a while for it to become a life-giving, holy time.
Yeah.
So embrace it. Pick a day, even if you do. Okay, I'm going to have 6 hours of Sabbath, but I'll do it consistently and I'll do it well. Start there. That's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all kinds of ways
Yeah.
to do it. I mean, there's a bunch of advice with families with kids, for example.
Right.
If you're in a community of some sort, we're in a church community. People have birthdays and weddings and all kinds of events. And how do you navigate that?
Yep.
It becomes super super stressful actually. But you have to make some decisions and stick to your decisions, see if it works, and then make corrections.
Yeah. That's good. That's helpful. Well, thanks so much for unpacking this for us. I look forward to more conversations. I'm sure this has created only more questions for people who are
Yeah.
listening, right? And
Yeah.
hopefully we can get to some of those answers over the next couple of weeks as we talk about this. But I feel like it was a great start, and just appreciate your practice of this and some of the stuff you could share with us from your journey. So thanks so much.
Thanks for the discussion.